Yes, sir. And what is going on, guys? I'm Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. Unfortunately, Dave Hartman is out today. He's getting ready for his daughter's wedding this week. So shout out to Dave and congratulations to him. But after last week, after breaking down the NFC East, we're sticking in the NFC this week, but we're heading west. And here to help us navigate the NFC West is the Director of Operations at PlayerProfiler, FatnasyPros 2021 Most Accurate Ranker and High Stakes Drafter. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Billy Muzio to the show. Billy, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on. Excited to talk the NFC West. This is my division.
Yeah,
a little bit of red and gold in the background, so might have some biases here. I'll try to set those aside, but excited to dive in and to digest this.
Yes, sir. Well, Billy, I'll try to hold back my bias. Considering your 49ers have eliminated my Cowboys the last 2 years in the playoffs, my friend.
Yeah, pretty easy to do. It's a choking hazard over there for Dallas.
Oh man, here you go, taking shots already. Well, Billy, where can we find you on Twitter, sir?
You can find me on Twitter at FFMuzio, and of course, my rankings projections over at PlayerProfiler.
Yes, sir. Guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. Well, Billy, before we get into our NFC West discussion tonight, I wanted to get to know a little bit about you, and I'm curious. I know you're a volume drafter, as your guy Theo likes to say, but how long have you been playing fantasy football?
Oh, man, I think I've been playing fantasy football close to 20 years now. Started middle school and then into high school and ran a bunch of our home leagues in high school. Started with baseball, of course, and kind of migrated over to football. And then started playing high stakes seriously about maybe 10 years ago, roughly.
Oh, wow.
And then we, kind of built the bankroll up and slowly but surely started playing more and more leagues, and then kept rolling over and rolling over and rolling over, and then finally started drafting some volume. So I'm, happy to say that, my draft partner and I, roll over a lot of our winnings still and continue to build those bankrolls and to continue to grow the amount of teams that we have. We're changing the strategy a little bit this year, but to answer your question, I guess 20 years roughly playing fantasy football, and seriously for about the last 10.
Hey, you mentioned fantasy baseball. I think that's an underrated sport. Fantasy baseball is very fun.
Yeah, I don't have the time or patience anymore to do baseball. I would just obsess over it, check lineups every hour, make sure I have a pitcher in and make sure there's no changes into the lineups and adjust. And so I know baseball's changed since those days where now I hear they allow people to do it weekly, which is just insane to me. Thinking about how tedious of a task it was to do it every single day. And I haven't played fantasy baseball in probably close to 15 years now. So it's probably, drastically changed in the years, but primarily a one-trick pony now. It's just fantasy football.
I hear you, Billy. Well, I'm curious. I know you've been playing fantasy for about 20 years now, you say. Well, what inspired you to start creating fantasy football content?
Honestly, it was a way to write off beer. So a buddy of mine, Bradley Stalder, we were in a couple sleeper leagues together, and we were talking about doing projections. And I had always done like rankings where I just kind of force ranked people, never had dove into the numbers per se, and actually put everything in an Excel sheet and, multiplied everything out and done every attempt and every passing yard and every rushing attempt and yard and reception and the whole 9 yards. And so we decided to do it together. And then we said, well, shit, we're already doing this. We're on the phone and calls all the time talking football. We might as well just start recording these things and start doing a podcast. And I'm like, oh man, yeah, I can, write it off with my business and I can sponsor it so I can buy us the equipment and we can, write it off from a marketing expense. We'll just market my business. And that's how it started, was just me a way to write it off and to advertise my business on it as the sole advertiser. And that's how it started, honestly. And then it just started growing. And then, we started doing more rankings, and then we went into fantasy data and then won the rankings contest the year after that, and kind of slowly but surely just kind of took off. And next thing you know, it was podcasting 2-3 times a week and guest appearing 2 times a week and, doing rankings for sites. And it just kind of caught fire, honestly.
Wow. So is that business that you used to sponsor, is that a still running business?
Yeah, it's grocery outlet, bargain market. I am the owner of the Bend store up in Bend, Oregon. Every store is independently owned, independently operated, and we have a staff of about 40 employees, and I don't have to be there as much as I used to have to be there, and so I have more time to do this kind of stuff, the stuff I love to do: talk football and do projections and draft.
Very cool. And before we move on, what was the name of that podcast that you and Bradley have? Is that still running, or has
No,
that
the
been put to
podcast is
bed?
no longer around. When I left to full time last year, we kind of disbanded it. It used to be called the Fantasy Football Fanalists, and then I went to full time fantasy last year, and it was Grind Time. And then now that I've been over here at Player Profiler, record weekly on the Dominator, which is on Sundays, and then of course First Class Fantasy, which is every Thursday. This week it'll be Friday due to our guest availability, but Thursdays usually typically with Theo Greminger over there at Player Profiler.
Yeah, so Billy, in the intro, I mentioned your role with the Player Profiler being the director of operations, and my introduction to you was actually listening to the Dominator with you and Matthew Kelly. Can you talk a little bit about your your role with Player Profile and how that opportunity presented itself?
Yeah, so because my business background, Matt and I had done some projects together in the past, and we were talking about scaling the company and about starting something that I can't really announce that much yet on air, but it's something big will happen in 2024 over at Player Profiler, and so my job was to help scale, to help create SOPs and action plans, and help manage the staff and help with licensing and all sorts of good stuff. Director of operations pretty much means I do a little bit of everything. I help wherever I'm needed. I of course, help manage a lot of the staff and do a lot of the people side, but also the business side. And so, I manage investor relations. I manage, the staff and kind of the vision with Matt and do a lot of the behind the scenes work that you really don't see inside the fantasy football world, right?
Yeah.
The strategy side of the site and advertisements and of course assistant content and marketing and those areas as well. And so my role is all encompassing, and I love it because it's what my role is in my business. And so it just fit naturally. It was a natural fit for Matt and I to join teams and for me to take my fantasy knowledge with my business knowledge and morph them together into this role at Player Profiler.
Yeah. Well, I've been a big fan of the Roto Underworld and Matthew Kelly, what he's been putting out there for a long time. And you and Theo and the guys that he's added over the years, you guys have been really good. Great.
Thanks. I'd love to hear it.
So let's get after it. I mentioned we're talking the NFC West, and that's, your squad. We're going to start off with your squad here, the 49ers. I'm curious, man. Trey Lance, what are you doing with him? Are you rostering him in any format?
I think there's a place that you can own Trey Lance. I don't think it's redraft. I don't think it's best ball. I think if you own him, it's because you have to. You can't drop him. It's going to be in super flex leagues. It's going to be in dynasty. He's just a must hold, and I think that's all that you can really do with him right now. I've been saying since they drafted him that he was the wrong fit for the Niners. I didn't like him fitting the scheme. Yeah, he was talented. He had some legs, and that's what they wanted, but I realistically think the pick was Mac Jones all along, and then they just kind of chickened out the last second because of the media. But I just think that he struggled with the Niners. I don't think he was able to run the West Coast offense effectively. I don't think that he was able to get the ball into the playmaker's hands. And when he was, rushed or hurried, he just tucked the ball and ran. And so I just don't think it's a good fit for the Niners. And so I'm never been crazy about Trey Lance, but I think if you own him, you have to hold him in those dynasty formats and inside of Superflex because that's the only place he has value, because we know Purdy's coming off of an elbow injury. There's some uncertainty there on his timeline. I expect him to play week 1, but if he doesn't, then we know that there is some competition at least between Darnold and Lance, and he may have an opportunity may present itself for Lance to pounce on it. But I just don't think that even if he does have an opportunity, I don't think he's going to be able to capitalize on it, because we saw what Brock Purdy was able to do last year. He had an amazing streak, one of the best streaks of all time. And he was quite effective inside of that role and was able to run this Shanahan West Coast offense. And so we look at it and say, Jimmy Garoppolo never had that winning streak. If you dive into the numbers deep and you actually set like a minimum snaps of 350, he led the league in a lot of different categories. Touchdown percentage, he actually was nearly 1.5% higher than Patrick Mahomes, 7.6 for 6.3 in touchdown rate. He, had a higher rate than Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, higher passer rating than a lot of big names as well. And so he was number 2 in red zone pressures, in red zone pressure completion percentage. And so there's a lot to like about Brock Purdy, and think you could also state that we're going to see some regression, which is absolutely true. But at the same time, anyone who's going to be operating under center for the San Francisco 49ers is going to have fantasy relevance because of the weapons that he's surrounded by. He's got Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk. I mean, you name it. There's weapons all over this field, and all he needs to do is get them the ball. And I think that Brock Purdy excelled in that role and is going to continue to do so. Absolutely.
That's a great transition to this next question here, Billy. You look at the weapons in San Francisco, and you saw what Brock Purdy's capable of with those weapons. You look at him in fantasy, is he a quarterback 1 or a quarterback 2 in your eyes?
I think he's got quarterback 1 upside, but I think he's more than likely like a mid-range, quarterback 13 through 18 on a week-to-week basis. When we dive into the numbers from last year, he definitely excelled and had some flashes. And we have, quarterback 18, week 13, quarterback 8 in week 14, quarterback 13, week 16, quarterback 9, week 17. So there's some ups and downs, but the consistency was, completion percentage, touchdowns, and of course, just being able to get the playmakers the ball. So I think that we can expect a quarterback 2 season out of him. I think if everything went as planned, he has potential to be a back-end quarterback 1, but most likely that mid-range quarterback 2.
You can't be mad about that, especially for what you got him for last year if you traded for him and picked him up off the waiver wire. But when you look at Brock Purdy, do you view him as a long-term fantasy asset?
I think he could be, honestly. The kid reminds me a lot of like Tom Brady when Tom Brady was coming into the league. And he has a lot of that same energy, late draft pick as well, just very humble, always building up his teammates and everyone else around him. That's why I loved the kid last year, watching him on tape and then seeing him in the interviews. It was such a contrast to watching somebody like it's hard to put a name right now, but you look at a lot of players when they interview and you can tell a lot about a person. And Purdy was consistently empowering those around him, saying he was there to do his job, saying that he wanted to just help the team win, the organization win, took the blame whenever anything went wrong. You see other quarterbacks, like Zach Wilson, for instance, didn't admit fault, right? Was saying, no, I felt like I gave it my all. It wasn't me. Right. And Purdy, on the other hand, saying, oh, yeah, I think I could have done this better. Team put me in a good spot. It was on me, whatever it was. And so I think that Purdy, just the maturity level that you see out of him was far beyond his years as a rookie. And I think that he gained the respect of the locker room by doing so.
Absolutely. And we have a comment here. Flowosaurus, Zach Wilson versus Purdy. I think I'd take Purdy every day of the week there. Billy, I can't speak for you. I'm sure you have the same answer as well.
It's not even close for me, and that's biases aside. It just breaks down to the maturity level, and it breaks down to just the genuineness of the individual and seeing him performance. The person, everything. I mean, you cross the board. I think I take Purdy now.
Yeah, one thing also you've seen. You mentioned the teammates. Quarterback has to be the leader of his team. His teammates really accepted Purdy, whereas teammates for Zach Wilson didn't have a lot of nice things to say about him.
Yeah, it just breaks down to how he reacted to situations and where he placed blame.
Yeah, exactly. And another key member of that San Francisco 49ers team is, Christian McCaffrey, but running backs tend to get injured. He has an injury history. Is the handcuff to McCaffrey the most valuable handcuff in fantasy?
I would say traditionally, yes. especially being on the Niners. That being said,
Right.
Elijah Mitchell himself also has some health concerns throughout his young career and has yet to show that he can remain healthy. So when we look at handcuffs, we have to value or look at contingent value, and we have to say, well, what if the starter goes down? Where would Elijah Mitchell, be on a week-to-week basis? And you could argue he'd be a back in RB1, he'd be a high end RB2. Either way, the downside is that he could also get hurt that same week or the week after because he's been so fragile. And so I would say the handcuff to the Niners is one of the most valuable positions, or say one of the most valuable handcuffs in the league. And I would think it's Mitchell. I mean, I know it's Mitchell, but the question is, how long will he be healthy on the field as well?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I was listening to the 32 Beat Writers podcast, and they had on a beat reporter from for the 49ers, and he mentioned that Jordan Mason looked like to have been stepping up and looking better than Elijah Mitchell. When you look at that backup situation, is Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason the backup to own, do you think, in fantasy?
I think Mitchell's still the back to own. When we look down the stretch, they had the opportunity to play both of them when they were trying to rest Christian McCaffrey in these blowout games. And we know that Mitchell was always the first one to get crack at it, be active on game day. And so I'm pretty certain it is Mitchell without a doubt, honestly. And I think Mason will probably get his opportunities more this year, but it's going to be playing a distant second behind Mitchell.
Last year when during training camp, we heard a lot about the connection between Trey Lance and Brandon Ayuk, and we've heard about Ayuk looking really good, earlier in many OTAs. But when you look at this 49ers offense with Purdy leading the way, which 49ers wide receiver do you think benefits the most?
So I think we have to look at this situation as a variable because Purdy, as of today, is still recovering from his elbow injury and is on track to play week 1, they are saying. But we also know that they're probably not going to want to push the ball down the field to start and risk re-injuring that elbow. So I think that an argument could be made for halves of the season. I think that you could say that Deebo Samuel was probably going to be the biggest beneficiary of him taking to throw shorter passes, throw behind the line of scrimmage, and not wanting to push the ball down the field. George Kittle probably gets in the mix there as well. And as the season progresses, I would anticipate them to start throwing the ball a little bit more, regaining trust in that elbow, and allowing him to build that strength back up. So I'm going to lean towards Deebo Samuel in 2023. Last year, I leaned Ayuk. The year before that, I leaned Deebo. But I think we have to read and analyze the situation on a year-to-year basis. And in particular, this year, probably on a week-to-week basis, depending upon the news and the trust that Purdy has with his arm. And so I don't think that we can just, slot Deebo in for the lead receiver all year, but more than likely to start.
Absolutely. Well, we know the 49ers offense is explosive and probably the best in the NFC West. But when you look at the Seahawks, they went out and they added Jackson Smith-Njigba and Zach Charbonnet via the draft. And you saw what Geno Smith was able to do with DK Metcalf and Kenneth Walker and Tyler Lockett. After the additions that the Seahawks have made in the offseason, could their offense potentially be better than San Francisco's?
I mean, anything's possible. I don't think it's as likely. I think Geno Smith had a career year last year. You could argue, Purdy had a career year, but it's 1 year. I think it'll break down to defenses. I think the Niner has a better defense. I think the Seahawks have the weapons. I think the Seahawks will definitely be in contention for this division. I think it's these two pretty clearly ahead of the other two. But I'm just not sure that Geno Smith is going to be the same Geno Smith he was last year. I think that Geno Smith definitely took a step forward here with Seattle and is probably going to remain in that step forward. But there's a lot of moving pieces in Seattle this year. They added Jackson Smith-Njigba. They added Zach Charbonnet. They still have Kenneth Walker. They still run a lot of 12 personnel. Are they going to change that 12 personnel? Are they going to run more 3 wide receiver sets? What is this offense going to look like in 2023? There's a lot of questions. And so as they are, changing that identity, or maybe they don't change that identity. Maybe they continue with 12 personnel. And so this is one of those teams I'm really watching in camp. I want to see what we hear, what we see. I want to see what formations they're running, because it's really going to change the landscape of the fantasy world for us, especially with Jackson Smith-Njigba, especially with the running backs and the rest of these receivers. And so I think that to answer your question, they definitely have a shot to win this division. It's not out of the question. I'd say it's a pretty good shot, quite frankly, because they have a starting quarterback right now. They know who it is, and they're able to hit the ground running. It's going to break down to the defense, though, I think, ultimately.
Yeah, you look at that Seattle offense, and the biggest question really is Geno Smith. And when you look at Geno Smith, is he a buy or sell for you?
In Dynasty?
Yeah, let's go with Dynasty.
Dynasty, I would sell. I'm going to capitalize on the career year. I think if you could acquire him cheap and you are in need of a quarterback and you are in win now mode, I think I would go for him. I'd buy. So I think there's a scenario which you could buy, a scenario in which you could sell. I hate to do that as a cop out, but it's true with Geno Smith. Just depends on what your roster construction looks like, where you're at in your build. Are you a win now team? Are you rebuild mode? It just depends on what you're doing in Dynasty. But if I'm rebuilding and someone is in need of a quarterback and they're running for a championship, I would put Geno on the block and I'd look to see what I can get for him, because you're arguably never going to have a higher market for him.
Yeah. Well, that the Seahawks wanted to strengthen their offense. I mentioned Jackson Smith-Njigba. They drafted him, but they already had Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. When you look at those three receivers and you factor in their ADP, who do you find yourself drafting more often than not?
I like to go talent. I know that when we look at the numbers, I know that Tyler Lockett has outscored in fantasy points per game, outscored DK Metcalf, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I know it's like right there. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it is.
I'm pretty sure that he's outscored DK Metcalf in points per game the last 2 years. That being said, I still think DK Metcalf is a freak athlete. Tyler Lockett's getting older. He's aging. I think that Jackson Smith-Njigba will probably start taking that role by the end of the season. I think DK Metcalf is still the clear number one. I lean DK Metcalf just because the size, the speed, the height, the strength over all these guys. I just mentioned how much the Seahawks run 12 personnel. They actually run the most 12 personnel on first down in the league, 40%. I think they also run some of the most 12 personnel on second and third downs as well. And so if they continue with that, that's why I said I want to watch what this offense does and what formations they're running in camp and in a preseason, because if they continue to run 12 personnel, that means that we're going to have, two receivers on the field. They're going to have one receiver who's going to be out of the mix. And I think that receiver to start at least is Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's going to have to work his way into the lineup and work in as the number two receiver. Because I don't think there's a scenario in which Jackson Smith-Njigba can overthrow DK Metcalf. There is a scenario where he can overthrow Tyler Lockett, but based upon Tyler Lockett's productivity and what we've seen out of him the last couple of years, I don't think that's to start out the gate. Jackson Smith-Njigba also, had a really missed a lot of games last year in college in Ohio due to that hamstring injury. And so I question, I question, how soft he is, and is he going to be able to play through injuries in the NFL? And so I like Jackson Smith-Njigba as a talent. I just think I have some questions and I have some concerns with him being on Seattle, at least for 2023. I think 2024, great. He's going to probably be, leaps and bounds ahead of where he's going to be in 2023. But if they continue to run 12 personnel, then he's going to have limited opportunities and it's going to limit his amount of fantasy points.
Yeah, we've seen in the NFL that sometimes rookie wide receivers can take off from week one, and sometimes it takes a little bit. You stated that it might take a little while for Jackson Smith-Njigba to beat out Tyler Lockett, but that's the role you think he'll have. I know your rankings are on PlayerProfiler.com, but without giving too much away, what type of season are you projecting from Jackson Smith-Njigba in 2023?
So I can give you the projections. Let's go ahead. I'll pull them up real quick. So NFC West. Jackson Smith-Njigba right now, and by all means, this is like I said, I like the talent. So 17.5% target share, which is 98 targets. Tyler Lockett I have at 20.5%, which is 114 targets. DK Metcalf at 24%, which is about 135 targets. And so that pecking order is pretty much what we see inside of draft rooms. And you can argue Jackson Smith-Njigba goes ahead of Tyler Lockett at times. And I think that if they continue to run 12 personnel, Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be the odd man out. But we know they spent a round one pick on him, but they also spent a round two pick on Zach Charbonnet. So they may continue to utilize, a pretty run heavy approach, which is going to mean that tight ends need to be on the field. And so I think that this is a pretty bullish this for me, it's bullish. It might be conservative for most, but I think that 98 targets as a rookie at a team that runs a lot of 12 personnel is pretty bullish for this receiver. It's 827 yards and 5.5 scores, and so it brings him inside of my rankings and projections to wide receiver number 41.
Okay, I mean 5.5 scores over 800 yards. You're not mad about that for a rookie.
No, not at all. I just think that the expectation for him is to come in and win the number 2 job and have this 1,000-yard season because he was an early round 1 pick. And I just think that people need to kind of look at it and say it's the Seahawks. They run 12 personnel, they run the ball a lot. And so if this was the Chiefs, if this was a pass heavy team like the Chargers, like if this was the Bengals, if this was a team that's going to throw the ball 660 times, 670 times, 680 times, then yes, that's realistic. But a team like Seattle, who's pretty run heavy, it's going to be, he's got a lot of hurdles to jump through and to get over, I should say, in order for him to return value, because he's being drafted right now as a top 30 receiver. And I think that's going to be a lot harder than people think for him to return value there.
I agree with you there. And you mentioned the addition of Zach Charbonnet, and leave it to Pete Carroll to double down on day 2 running backs year after year, or back-to-back seasons rather. But, listening to the Player Profiler family, I know, I can't speak for everybody, but it sounds like you guys are still pretty high on Kenneth Walker, not really worried about Zach Charbonnet. But I'll ask you directly, are you buying the Kenneth Walker dip or the Zach Charbonnet hype? I
don't really like Zach Charbonnet's tape, honestly. And I wasn't that high on Walker. I mean, Player Profiler was a lot higher on Zach Walker than I was, or sorry, Kenneth Walker. I just combined the names. Than Kenneth Walker. And so I was telling people to fade Kenneth Walker when he was going in early round 2 back in March and April, or back in March drafts. And then the draft came around and he dipped. I love his ADP in round 5. I buy him in round 4, honestly. But I don't think, and then when I mention these rounds, it's FFPC is where I do most of my drafting. Zach Charbonnet to me is, I think he has talent. I wasn't crazy about the tape. I think Kenneth Walker is a more athletic player. I think that Kenneth Walker is more explosive, and I think that he's going to get the majority of the work early and often. I think Zach Charbonnet is going to have to earn the trust of Pete Carroll, and he'll have to work his way into it. I don't like his ADP. I don't like his cost being associated with it, and so I am buying the dip on Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, I don't have either one of these guys, but I wish I would have added a little bit more Kenneth Walker last year when I did. When you look at Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker, though, do you think that running back duo is the best in the NFC West?
Yes, it has to be. There's Christian McCaffrey and Mitchell. Okay, yeah, I mean, I'd probably lean Christian McCaffrey and Mitchell, but both injury prone, right? And there's no duo inside of the Rams. It's just Cam Akers and then a bunch of crap, and then you have Arizona, and it's pretty much like Keontae Ingram and James Conner. So I still lean the Niners just because Christian McCaffrey is that good in my opinion, and I think that he's gonna another chance at 100 plus targets, and so I would lean the Niners, non-biased here, but Seattle's very close.
Yeah, I can't argue with you there. You mentioned the Rams, and it's Cam Akers and a bunch of just guys, Jags. Is Cam Akers himself, is he overvalued in your eyes?
I think he's undervalued this year just because when we look at this backfield, there's not a lot of competition for touches. So they have Kyron Williams, Ronnie Rivers, Sony Michel, Zach Evans, and we look at the involvement of this offense, and I don't think any one of those guys is going to eclipse over 100 rushing attempts. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Cam Akers will probably see 55% of the rush share, which is about 225 plus touches or rushing attempts, not touches. And, at that rate is going to get him close to 1,000 yards, probably slightly over. And then he's going to be involved. We saw him kind of get more involved in the passing game as well. I think that Kyron Williams has a chance to perform in the passing game. He was an exceptional pass catcher coming out of college. And there's been a lack of weapons in the passing game here for the Rams. And so I think that if there's a spot for Kyron Williams to carve out a role, it's going to be in the passing game. But I still think Cam Akers is, just leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else in this backfield.
You mentioned all the guys behind Cam Akers, and for my money, give me Zach Evans. But if you're a Cam Akers owner, is Zach Evans a must handcuff? It doesn't sound like you're that big a fan of his.
No, I don't think that the Rams are even convinced right now either, or else they wouldn't have went out and signed Sony Michel. Anytime we see a veteran get added after rookie minicamp, it's never a good sign. That means they either didn't like what they've seen in the rookie, or that they have questions and they have some concerns. So Kyron Williams was still there, Sony Michel is still there, Ryan Rivers is still there, Zach Evans was added late, and so I don't think they really have any ties to him. And I know he was good in college, but the NFL is a different speed, and I don't think they necessarily have to lean on him.
That's true. So a couple weeks ago, a report came out that the Rams indeed did try to trade away Matthew Stafford. But, we saw them improve their offensive line. If Matthew Stafford is healthy, of course, Cooper Kupp. We just discussed Cam Akers. Is the Rams offense being overlooked in fantasy?
No, it's pretty consolidated targets, in my opinion, and a consolidated backfield as well. It's a pretty easy team to project and identify outside of, I should say maybe just at the top. Once you start getting outside of the 1 and 2 or 3, it gets pretty messy just because anybody can step forward, right? It could be Van Jefferson, it could be Tutu Atwell, it could be Ben Skowronek, it could be Puka Nacua. We just don't know. And I think that you have to look at this and say, hey, what's going to happen in camp? What's going to happen inside of preseason? And we'll have a better understanding heading into week 1. But somebody's going to have to step up as the number 2 in this offense. I think it's Van Jefferson to start the season. Tutu Atwell was a late round 2 pick, so has the ability to kind of step forward, just a little bit undersized. So there's a lot of ways this could go, but I don't think they're being undervalued. I think they're probably, I think that's being appropriately valued. Okay.
Well, you kind of answered this next question here about the Rams wide receiver too, so we'll move on. And looking at the Cardinals, that's the team with more questions than answers. But you look at those wide receivers. Are you buying or avoiding the Cardinals wide receivers?
It depends on cost. I'm not pushing any of these guys up my board at all. I think Marquise Brown will probably still see his bit. I like Rondale Moore a good bit this year, just because he's going to be playing behind the line of scrimmage a lot. In the slot, running as that quick underneath receiver, and we know that we're going to have some inexperience at quarterback while Kyler Murray is recovering, and typically those inexperienced quarterbacks tend to favor. Slot receivers tend to favor passes behind the line of scrimmage and dump offs and don't throw as deep. So I think Marquise Brown probably struggles at least until Kyler Murray, if and when he's back. And Rondale Moore and the tight end Trey McBride probably see the most out of that uncertainty, as well as James Conner. But I think that I'm not really going in my way to target these guys. If I had to pick, I like Rondale Moore at cost the most.
Okay. You mentioned Kyler Murray. What are you doing with him in Dynasty?
Dynasty is a hold. You can't sell him because you're not going to get return on him, and you just have to just hold him. That's all you can do right now, in my opinion.
One of the members of the Player Profiler, Alan Seslowski, is very, very high on James Conner. I don't know if you share that same enthusiasm, but is James Conner the only draftable player on the Cardinals?
No, I think Trey McBride is undervalued. Zach Ertz coming off that injury as well, right? We have Marquise Brown, who has had injury concerns throughout his career. Rondale Moore, who's been injured throughout his career. So I'm a poker player as well. When you look at this, I look and say, what outs does Trey McBride have? And Trey McBride has a lot of outs. I mean, if we have one more injury to Marquise Brown or another injury to Rondale Moore, he steps in as the number 2 option in the passing game now. And he's being drafted, outside of tight end 15. And so I think that McBride has the opportunity to potentially finish as a top 12 tight end if things break his way. It's just going to be, it's going to be based on quarterback play. And if they are bad, we're going to see garbage time and we're going to see them playing catch up in games and throwing the ball. It just depends on who his quarterback is. But I like the amount of outs that Trey McBride has. I also, back to your question, I do like James Conner this year because we look at his contract. They have an out next year, so they could potentially run him into the ground till the wheels fall off. They'll probably do that, quite frankly, because they're going to need to lean on him as they figure out the rest of this offense. And so I think, Conner has the potential to be a top 20 back this year, probably 19, 20-ish range. And I think I have him in my projections right now as RB23. But when you look at the fantasy points, it's very tight there. Between between running back 17 and running back 23, we're separated by like 3.5, 4 fantasy points. So that's anybody's game right there. And I think that James Conner, if he can stay healthy, I think is in line for some major workload.
Yeah, you mentioned that you do a lot of your drafting on FFPC. Excuse me. You're looking at this division. Which stack is your favorite out of the NFC West?
And
best ball.
Every one of them. I mean, you can. You can't. I look at it and say, hey, I want to stack teams. I'm gonna look at the schedules and say, okay, Seattle has the shootout schedule. They're facing Philly, Tennessee, Pittsburgh. Okay, I'm going to stack them with Pittsburgh. I'm going to stack them with Philly. I'm going to come back around and take San Francisco. And, they have Arizona and Baltimore and Washington. That's not as nice of a schedule, but it could benefit the running game. So I might, take Christian McCaffrey and then take, some pieces in Baltimore, 10 pieces in Washington. And then, so I built so many teams that I just attack every single team.
You got to get creative.
You got to get creative. Yeah. And so if I was building one team and if I only had one bullet, I would lean on the Niners because I want to, again, I have a little bit of bias, but it's also the most explosive offense, in my opinion, right? You have the Shanahan West Coast offense. They get creative. They get explosive. They have huge scores. And so I look at that and say, if I only had one bullet, that's the way I'd lead, and I'd lean on SF.
I got you. So which one player are you buying in the NFC West?
If I only could pick one?
Yeah.
Are we baking in cost here? Or is it just going to be pick one player?
If you want to go by ADP, if that changes it, then yeah. But
Christian McCaffrey is the obvious answer, right?
Obviously, yeah.
If I'm, baking it in cost, and if I'm looking at everything, I'm looking at all the teams like Rondell Moore and Trey McBride are appetizing to me because these guys are going outside the top, Rondell Moore is going outside wide receiver number 45, or sometimes outside wide receiver 50, has the opportunity to finish as, wide receiver 40 to 42, 43, 44. You have Trey McBride is going outside tight end 15, has the ability to possibly finish inside the top 12. So if we're baking in price, I probably lean with those two. But if I'm just picking one player, it's Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, for me, my answer would be Brock Purdy, just the price that you can get him at and the offense that he's in. And, most leagues being super flex, he's a nice buy right now.
Great.
What about which one player are you selling in the NFC West?
Geno Smith. I'm back to the kind of the top of the hour. I'm looking to capitalize on his season and try to get the most value out of him.
Yeah, for me, I was going Cam Akers. We haven't, it's a lot about potential and what he can do, and we've got a small sample size of, what he's capable of. But if I could sell him maybe for a wide receiver 2-ish type player, or get a late first round pick, I think I'd do that all day.
I think it's a good one too. People are going to be looking for running backs. They're going to get, they're looking at 2023 and they're saying he's going to have a massive season, but there's a lot of question marks outside of that. So that's a good sell.
Exactly. Okay. Which player are you stashing from this division?
Like super deep stash?
Yeah. See, if you want to do deep stash, go for it.
Yeah. Deep stash Tutu Atwell. Somebody has to step forward in this offense. We just talked about them having a lack of weapons. And Tutu Atwell, to me, is an explosive player. They have the draft capital in them, and they're probably going to want to see more of him as they have some aging weapons. So I'm gonna stash Tutu Atwell.
Yeah, my stash, he plays for the same team. I'm going to go with Van Jefferson. We've seen some glimpses. He has the speed. He can take one to the house at any time. And that wide receiver 2 job's wide open. I feel like he's going to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Billy, you don't strike me as a bold take guy, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Give me one NFC West bold take.
Bold take, Trey McBride finishes as a tight end 1.
Oh, wow. My bold take for this division is Kyler Murray comes back ahead of schedule, and he finishes as a QB1 in 2023.
How ahead of schedule?
I think he'll be back week 5.
Oh, that'd be early. Yep, it'd be really early.
I don't know. Maybe I'm a little too those reports about him being ahead of schedule, and that was about the projected time they thought he was going to be coming back. Maybe that's gotten to me a little bit.
Yeah, my concern is that they're 0-5 at that point. Do you rush him back?
Oh, right, exactly.
Season's a lost cause. There's a lot of variables there.
Let me ask you this before we get you out of here, Billy. If let's just say the Cardinals are the worst team in the NFL and they do have the number 1 overall pick, do they draft Caleb Williams with the first overall pick, or do they trade it away like the Bears did?
They probably take Caleb Williams and trade, and they trade Murray. Murray's been kind of a headache for them. He's shown to be a non-team player. I would assume that they would probably just go for Caleb Williams and go on the rookie deal and rebuild.
Okay. Well, Billy, man, I can't thank you enough for your time. Before we get you out of here, I know you've got a lot on your plate content-wise. Can you let people know what kind of content to expect from you and where they can find it?
Yeah, you can find all my rankings projections over at PlayerProfiler.com. I do all of our rankings projections with Dario there, and we hash those out and post them. Got the analyst cheat sheet over there in the draft kit as well. So it's a 1-page cheat sheet for the top 300. And I customize that on PPR, tight end premium, and Superflex. So depending upon your league, you can utilize those 1-page cheat sheets. And again, those can be found inside the draft kit. I record weekly on the Dominator on Sundays and record weekly Thursday on First Class Fantasy, which just hit top 30 in the nation on the fantasy podcast. So happy to see that.
Oh, very nice, man. Congratulations there. Before we get you out of here, remind the people where they can find you on Twitter.
At FF Muzio, and appreciate you having me on today.
I appreciate you, man. Appreciate your time. Guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.